What's up, everybody? Welcome to another episode of, we're going to call it College Fantasy Recap. That's what me and Felix called it last week. Obviously, no Felix, just Matt Bruning here. What a week two of college football we had. A lot of people looked at that schedule and thought this is not going to be a good week of college football. We only had a couple top games on there. It ended up being a lot of fun. And typically, that's the way it works, right? With those weeks that we expected not to be fun, we have a ton of great games. I'm going to break down some of the games here and just talk about the players. We will talk about some of the fantasy angles. I will give you guys some stock up, stock down that I see from the players here from weeks 1 and week 2, and then just some overall player discussions before we jump out of here. So we got to start with the game everybody was watching to kick off that early morning window, and that was Texas beating Michigan 31-12. Quinn Ewers, 24-36 for 67% completion percentage, 246 yards, 3 touchdowns, 0 interceptions. He's back, baby. Quinn Ewers looked great. I obviously love it. Have been a big Quinn Ewers fan for a very long time. He just seems to show up in those games. Alabama a couple years ago, Alabama last year. Washington in the playoff game, I thought that he actually played really well in as well. It took him a little bit of time, I think, in that game, more so than even in this game here against Michigan in the Big House. But he always seems to show up in those big games. He had a couple really impressive throws in this one. The Matthew Golden touchdown to the left sideline that he threw, I thought, on a dart, on the move, to the only place that it was going to score a touchdown for Matthew Golden. He also had one over the middle, and I think it was to Gunnar Helm. I was like in between coaching a soccer game and watching this game, so I haven't had a chance to fully go back and watch the entire show or the entire game, but there was one over the middle where he throws it over a linebacker. Again, same thing. He moves up in the pocket, throws it off platform. Pretty sure it was to Gunnar Helm, back of the end zone, touchdown for Texas. Just really great game for Quinn Ewers, and I don't think you can take anything away from him. You kind of wish you could play like that every single week. I think he would definitely be locked into a top pick, a number one pick, a first round pick. I should not say number one pick like the number one overall pick, but a locked into a first round pick. But let's see what he looks like next week. Obviously, when he's not playing in just like those massive games, there are times where Quinn tends to play down to the competition. Jalen Blue was beat up in this game a little bit, so we did get to see true freshman running back Jarrett Gibson go 10 for 36, did get the one touchdown as well. I think it's a great thing for him to get a touchdown in a game like this. He is the future of that program. Hopefully with CJ Baxter and him coming back next year, being healthy. Blue did come in and out of this game, just the 22 yards on the ground, but again, comes through for you, at least in the receiving game. Doesn't do much for fantasy perspective as just the 22 yards on the ground, 37 through the air, but does still get a touchdown. Isaiah Bond, 3 for 51 and nothing. I do also want to touch on, again, Matthew Golden. Not a lot, but 6 for 31 does get the touchdown again. And like at this point, obviously next week, we're probably still starting Isaiah Bond, but this is not looking good, at least so far from a fantasy perspective. I mean, you could probably have started Bond last week and been okay. Golden got the 2 touchdowns, so if you started him, you were bailed out there. But realistically, if we're talking from a fantasy perspective in this game, the only player you wanted to start was tight end Gunnar Helm, who had 7 catches for 98 yards and a touchdown, and not any of us were starting him. And I don't even know that you would go necessarily roster him and think about starting him in the future. So the biggest takeaway for me on this was Jonte Cook. Jonte Cook did absolutely nothing in this game. He had a total of 11 snaps on the field, I believe, no targets. Jonte Cook is a guy that we loved in last year's wide receiver class. There were some of us who were talking about him as possibly being like the best. Sorry, 19 snaps altogether. I wanted to make sure I got that right. 11 in the slot, 8 out wide, 19 snaps altogether in that game against Michigan. No targets. Obviously, we hope he is going to be the future of this room. But again, this is not looking good for a guy that we expected to be one of the best wide receivers in his class. Now, again, he broke the year 1-0 theory. So at the end of the day, that's all that really matters. Even if he does go out there and have like a great year this year, we do expect him to lead that room next year right before he becomes draft eligible. So maybe we shouldn't be super worried about Jonte Cook. I am still, though, in a way, in the fact that we are here year 2 and 2 weeks in. He's not really done anything at all. That does worry me. I have to admit I am a little bit worried about it. Overall, 56 yards. That's it. Now, granted, last week, 3 targets or 3 receptions for the 56 yards. But again, it was against Colorado State, folks. 56 yards, no touchdowns, 3 targets, 3 receptions so far to kick off his two weeks of his sophomore season. Not great. Michigan side, not really much to talk about. We knew probably Colson Loveland was going to be the guy. He had the best day. 8 catches for 70 yards. Did have a big fumble that set Texas up for an easy score. No touchdowns. Donovan Edwards is pretty bad again. 6 for 41. Khalil Moling, 6 for 25. Davis Warren, who again was a starter, 22 of 33 for 67% completion percentage, 200 yards in the air, 1 touchdown, 2 interceptions. If you stayed up late last night, man, did Boise State almost pull off a massive upset. It would have been 2 of those. I guess 3, depending on, what you think of the game I'm about to talk about after this. But Oregon needs a last-second field goal to beat Boise State 37-34. On the Boise State side of things, really the only player talking about is Ashton Jeanty, who, again, had a massive game. And I want to give that up to him because, again, against an Oregon team that we do think is a good team, I've said I thought was the best team in the Big Ten. Not quite looking that way to start off this season, but 25, 192, and 3 on the ground. This is the best he's ever looked against a Power 5 team. He has looked really good this year. I think we should be, Chris Moxley made it, talked about it on the C2C live show where we had to predict like things we think we know about the season. And he said that he thinks he knows Ashton Jeanty is going to make it to the Heisman ceremony. It really looks like he's going to be right on that. Like, it has been an amazing start of the season right now for Ashton Jeanty, and I expect that to continue. So make sure to continue watching out for them. It was really good to see him go up against Oregon. I said that I thought Boise State was going to be that team out of the G5 that makes the playoff, especially if they keep that game close against Oregon. Well, they did exactly that with Madsen Maddox at quarterback too, who did not play well, but still looked really good. Again, had a chance to upset Oregon in this one. On the Oregon side of things, I'm going to keep it a little bit short because we're going to talk about Dylan Gabriel here later, but 18 to 21, 86% completion percentage, 243, 2 touchdowns, no interceptions. Negative 15 yards rushing due to all the sacks that he had, 11 attempts with 1 touchdown. Evan Stewart's back, though. Felix and I talked about this last week. We were not super worried about Evan Stewart after the game against Idaho. Was just kind of like hey, let's see what happens. They targeted him early. I believe the first pass after their first one was technically to Tez Johnson. I think after that they targeted Evan Stewart. They did it again on the second drive. And then on the third drive, they had a massive completion for like 60 plus yards that ended up going down and Oregon scoring a touchdown. They targeted Evan Stewart early and often in this game. Ended up though with only 5 for 112 and 1. Tez Johnson though, 3 receptions for a negative 1 yard and 0. So I am a little bit worried about Evan Stewart and Tez Johnson. I don't think it's early, obviously, so maybe I should not panic too much, but we talked a lot about this offense last year with Bo Nix and how Troy Franklin and Tez Johnson both ended up at the end of the year as top 15 wide receivers in fantasy. I'm starting to think that might not happen here. Maybe it will. Maybe it'll balance it out. But Oregon's got a tougher schedule this year, and they've got a lot of Big Ten opponents coming up. Ohio State, I think, in a couple weeks. Like, things are going to change really quickly for this team. I'm a little worried about both of those guys popping up into the top 15 where we weren't quite that worried about it, especially with having a guy like Dylan Gabriel at quarterback. One of the upsets of the weekend. Fair or unfair, whether Georgia Tech should have been ranked in the top 25 or not, doesn't matter. They were. Syracuse beats them 31-28. Haynes King, though, I thought still played good. I just rewatched that game this morning. He was 29-39, 74% completion percentage, 266 yards in the air with 1 touchdown. Did get 2 touchdowns on the ground with 67 yards rushing. Jamal Haynes came back to earth, though, a little bit in this one, 11 for 35 and 1. But Kyle McCord, 32 of 46, a 70% completion percentage, 381 passing yards, 4 touchdowns, 0 interceptions. And if anybody recorded this game, if you got YouTube TV, obviously, you guys can record multiple games at a time and go back and watch it. I want you to go back and watch this game and see how well he played in this. And again, I get it's Georgia Tech. Maybe they shouldn't have been ranked as a top 25 opponent, but some of the passes that he was making in this game to Gadsden, to Trevor Pena, and there's someone else, and for the life of me, I cannot remember. I'm going to look it up now because he made some throws to another wide receiver at times that were when I tell you NFL throws, they were NFL throws. It was extremely impressive to watch. Obviously I hope this continues. For anybody who's new here and does not know that I am a massive fan, Omari Hatcher, that's who it was, who had 5 for 67, but a couple throws like right up the middle over a linebacker and right in between the window of where the safety was coming in, just like perfectly to Hatcher where only he could catch it. There's one he actually made to Pena where the safety was coming down, was crashing in, and had he not thrown it to the outside, like it would have been an easy pick six, but he put it exactly where Pena could catch it, shielding Pena away from the big hit as well, allowed him to catch it, go out of bounds. It was a great throw. It just was. And what's even more surprising to me on that side of things is Jeff Nixon, who is their offensive coordinator, has for the most part been a running back coach his entire career in college football and in the NFL. You would think he'd run the ball more with a guy like LaQuint Allen in the backfield. He hasn't. Right now, Kyle McCord is third in the nation in passing yards and I believe second in attempts, and is only behind Jackson Dart and I think it's Chandler Morris. And okay, Jackson Dart, Lane Kiffin has literally left Jackson Dart out there when they were up 73-0 to pad those stats, which a lot of people are saying is because of the Heisman. So arguably could be the number 2 right now passer in the nation. They don't have a hard schedule, folks. Like, I'm going to talk more about Kyle McCord, so I'm going to leave it there. LaQuint Allen, 15 for 83. Aronde Gadsden, 6 for 93 and 2. And then Trevor Pena, 6 for 82 and 2. I think we need to be talking about having Trevor Pena as someone who you should be rostering in C2C leagues at the moment, because Kyle McCord looks for him early and often. He's making plays. And if Syracuse is going to continue to pass the ball like this, I think he's a guy that you have to mess. 2 weeks in a row, he's been a top option. Tennessee versus NC State. Tennessee beats up on them 51-10. This was like one of the late window games we were really excited about, because NC State, has been a team over the past 10 years under, this is when it sucks when you don't have a co-host, because like you forget like the name's there and then the name jumps out of your head. For the life of me now, cannot remember the NC State head coach. Obviously, he's been very good over the past, I think he's actually been with NC State for like the past 12 years. They have been a very consistent program and have consistently been one of the best coaches, one of the best football teams in the ACC, and have been very close to making like the playoffs, they've already been making bowl games. As Dave Dorn was the name I was looking for, as the head coach of NC State. But was a team that like many thought could be the team in the ACC to make the playoffs, win the ACC championship. They got blitzed here by Tennessee, 51-10. It was not pretty, and I'm going to be honest, you could tell by like mid-second quarter this was not going to be a game. And a lot of that's because of Grayson McCall, who we thought coming here, Robert and I running this offense with the kind of quarterback that Grayson McCall is, that he was going to thrive. Completion percentage-wise, I thought he was okay, 68%, 15-22, but only for 104 yards, no touchdowns, 1 interception, 6 yards on the ground. Grayson McCall, in my opinion, is what's wrong with NC State. That defense, I thought, actually looked fairly good early on, but when your defense is out there that much against an offense like Tennessee, at some point, this is going to get out of hand. That defense was getting no rest whatsoever, and it did. Again, 51-10. Nico looked good. They did pick him off twice. They looked much better. It was a tougher test for him than Chattanooga last week. Nico looked like he could do anything he wanted, and still, though, looked good. 16-23, 70% completion percentage, 211 yards through the air, 2 touchdowns and 2 interceptions, did get 65 yards on the ground and a touchdown as well. Dylan Sampson was the other guy in this game, though. 20 for 132, 2 touchdowns, 37 yards in the receiving game. I do want to touch on Squirrel White, because Felix and I talked a little bit about him last week. And we said, hey, should we be worried about him through the bowl game in week 1 against Chattanooga? He had 5 catches. Well, he had 2 for 67 in this one, so now he's up to 7 in 3 games. Again, I don't know that I'm panicking, but I do think, I can't remember who was asked someone asked in the chat last week if they should drop Squirrel White for this other player who showed us his CFF upside. I think I'm at a point where I am okay dropping Squirrel White. Like, I have not been as high as some of the others here at Campus Canton on like what his draft capital can be. There's some that believe he's a day 2 guy. I think he will get drafted. He's a good player, but I think he could push more for like day 3. And it just does not seem like he is a focal point. 2 for 67. I believe he technically led the wide receivers in this one, but like, this was a game at least early on, you would have thought would have been more involved, and he just wasn't. And I think it just doesn't seem like Nico's going to him. Just done 3 games in, we're talking about 7 catches in 3 games. Like, to me, that's not good. It's just not. It was what, 3? Oh, I don't remember. I think it's, yeah, I don't remember. It was like 3, 2, and 2, I guess, is what it's been. Like, it's just not been great for Squirrel White. Maybe that changes when they get into tougher matchups and like they need to pass more. So maybe he starts to see more volume. But like this point, I just don't think he's at all startable. And I don't know that he's rosterable. On the NC State side, Kevin Concepcion had a really big week last week. We saw that Grayson McCall was going to him a ton. This week, 5 for 53, was again the best receiver. Jolly was 4 for 30, the tight end. I would be very curious to see if they do not go to Cedric Bailey, the true freshman, here soon. If McCall continues to play this way, he's just been god awful. And since it's me here by myself, I'm going to go and say it. Can't remember who it is, but I've got those tweets pinned about you telling me how Grayson McCall is 10 times better than Jackson Dart and Quinn Ewers, and he's going to get drafted ahead of them in the first round. Don't you worry. I'm going to be retweeting those here soon. Because, I'm kind of trying to tell you at Coastal Carolina, this guy was a G5 warrior, great college quarterback, but once he played better competition, wasn't going to work out. I don't know if it's an injury or what's going on, but my God, Grayson McCall does not look good. Houston versus Oklahoma. Houston almost pulls off another pulls off an upset here of Oklahoma. They lose 12-16. So I've not had a chance to fully watch this game, but my main takeaways here was Javonte Barnes, 12 for 40. Gavin Sawchuk, my guy, 4 for 4. 4 carries, 4 yards, looked horrible. I don't know what to say at this point. Like, it really looked like he was primed to be the guy for Oklahoma this year. Through 2 games, it's not looking like that. And as a matter of fact, he's looked like the worst running back in that room. I mean, Taylor Tatum, again, I think he had like 1 for 6 or it was not great, but even he has looked better in 2 games than Gavin Sawchuk. Javonte Barnes seems to be the guy. It's weird to me because I don't think Javonte Barnes is that good of a running back. And maybe it was just the injury last year, though, that hampered Barnes and why he did not look that good. He's looked decent, I would say, at least through 2 games. I don't know what's going on here. Jackson Arnold, I thought, was okay. I've not been a big fan of his. 19 to 32, 59% completion percentage, 174 yards passing, 2 for 1, 11 for 28. I tried to tell people that this guy, I get he ran like a maniac in high school, but like you could just tell that was not going to work at the college level. Like that, the level of athleticism from the high school, at least in my opinion, from high school to college, was not going to translate. I get that he played at Denton Guyer, 6A in Texas, but like you could just watch, like it wasn't like pulling away from those dudes. Like you can see some of these other top athletes do. Like he was barely getting by some of those. I'm worried about Oklahoma. I think they've got a tough schedule. I know that this is blasphemy, but like we saw Michael Hawkins last week, that was probably more because of a blowout. I don't know that Michael Hawkins at any point takes over this year for Jackson Arnold outside of injury, but like I think expecting Jackson Arnold to be a top 10 CFF option or even top 24 CFF option and like a guy and the dude for Oklahoma, I think that dream is gone. And I think anybody hoping and praying on that is probably going to end up being wrong. Is really starting to make that quarterback class look not great. So we talked about those top 5 guys. I mean, Arch has been okay, but let's see. His, I think, is going to come from volume. Dante Moore, Malachi Nelson, Jackson Arnold, like, they done for him, in my opinion. So then it's down to Nico. Like, maybe Austin's been right from the beginning of this website. 0 QB's the way to go, because I feel like a lot of these past couple years, everybody's trying to grab those QBs early in these supplemental freshman drafts. Tell me the quarterback that's worked out for you. I mean, I guess you could say Lagway and Rayola, who we'll both talk about here in a minute. Both of them have been pretty impressive this year, actually. But that year, when we talked about 5 quarterbacks, great class, get your quarterback now, it is not looking great. Oh, I'm sorry. Aiden Childs and Sam Levitt are looking pretty good, though. Mike Valerie, I'll just go ahead and call you out. I heard your little hit at Aiden Childs. Pretty impressive day against Maryland. That's all I'll say. App State loses to Clemson 22-66. Cade Klubnik probably had I would say, the best game of his life. And I really don't know what to think of it. If I'm going to be honest, I went back and I watched a lot of this. Almost all of this came in the second half. I think it was like 3 minutes left in the second quarter. Cade had done almost all of this. 24-26, 92% completion percentage, 378 yards, 5 touchdowns, no interceptions, 5 yards on the ground, 2 rushing touchdowns. Phil Moffitt, 10 for 118 and 1. Bryant Wesco, 3 for 130 and 1. It was great to see Bryant Wesco, which I believe is very close now to breaking the year 1-0 or year 1-0 threshold. I mean, what a game from Cade Klubnik. That's impressive. Looked like a completely different guy against them than against Georgia. Here's the thing. Cade Klubnik, and I don't remember how Felix puts it. He talks a lot about this with other players, DJU specifically, in like this double tap before they throw the ball. I think he says it's called cracking the egg. I don't remember, and I'm probably messing that phrase up. But if you watch that game against Georgia, you see a lot of that from Cade Klubnik. You see a lot of that from him in general, almost like he sees the wide receiver coming open, but he's afraid to throw the ball. It's like he doesn't trust what he sees. I will say I did not see a lot of that against Appalachian State. Now, is that because it was against Appalachian State and he just trusted it? Was that something from Garrett Riley maybe? Was it something that maybe they schemed different? That part I don't know. I want to wait and see what happens next week. But I'm personally not trusting that out of Cade Klubnik at all. If anybody did start him, you got the best performance fantasy-wise, where I'm going to show the top players at each position here in a minute. You got by far the best performance, 60-plus points. Dude was amazing. But I'm not trusting that at all moving forward. I don't think he continues this kind of production or even close to it. All right. Samford, Florida. Samford loses 7-45. Not much to talk about here except for DJ Lagway. Gets his first start. 18-25, 72% completion percentage, 456 yards through the air. 3 touchdowns, no interceptions. I've said it for the past couple weeks. I thought we were going to see DJ Lagway regardless. And then when he came out and played in the game against Miami, I said that was the best drive we saw out of Florida. Now he gets to start with Graham Mertz still in concussion protocol. I said when it was announced, might be a bold take, but I think DJ Lagway starts the rest of the season. I believe Billy Napier has now technically come out and say we will still see DJ Lagway because he is extremely talented and we'll have this for him. I think they will likely go back to Graham Mertz. I think that's a mistake. Look, I get it. If you go back and watch some of these plays against Samford, there were some of those insane plays. The one that we all have talked at Campus Canton talked about all the time is he does his jump throw, and I think it went 60, 70 yards. We've said you really just can't do that in college football. He had a couple of plays like that in this game. He had one where just footwork was atrocious. Him moving around in the pocket, just fires this ball that again travels 50 yards. I believe it was for a touchdown. Just ridiculous play. And he can do that because he's just an incredible athlete, an incredible specimen at the quarterback position, has an incredible arm. You're going to win games just because of how special he is. Billy Napier, get your head out of your you-know-what. Figure it out. Play DJ Lagway. This is no disrespect to Graham Mertz. I think that, last year he showed us he's, a better quarterback than he probably was for a couple years at Wisconsin, especially after that COVID game where I think he threw his 5 touchdowns, looked incredible. But Lagway is the kind of guy that can win you games. If you want to save your job, if you want to try and keep Florida moving in some kind of forward momentum, I think you got to start the true freshman. You already know it's going to come with ups and downs, but at least you can sell the fan base that you're dealing with the ups and downs from an extremely talented 5-star freshman quarterback than the ups and downs of a 4 or 5-year starter in Graham Mertz that doesn't do anything exciting or special. Colorado versus Nebraska was the other late night game that we were all watching. Colorado loses 10-28. Wasn't even that close, folks. Shedeur Sanders, 23 of 38, 61% completion percentage, 244 yards, 1 touchdown, 1 interception, 8 for -30. Most of that 240 coming in garbage time when Nebraska had at that point already been up 28-0 since I believe halftime. Travis Hunter, by far the best player on Colorado, 10 for 110, did not get the touchdown in this one. Dylan Raiola, 23 of 30, 77% completion percentage, 185 yards in the air, 1 touchdown, no interceptions. The interesting split between the backfield. Talked about this last week. I thought it was really concerning with the 4-way split. It then boiled down to Dante Dowdell and Ramir Johnson. Dante Dowdell, 17 carries for 74 yards and 2. Ramir Johnson, 10 for 33. He did have 8 for 49 and 1. However, like 20 of that and the 1 touchdown came on a pass that should have been intercepted, but it kind of deflected in the air. Ramir Johnson caught it and then ran in for a touchdown. Dowdell looks like is going to be the guy to roster in this backfield. Austin's talked about it. I've talked about it. He's a guy, and he looked good. They went to him multiple times in the end zone, red zone, obviously, with the 2 rushing touchdowns. I think he's a guy that will be fairly good for your fantasy teams moving forward. And I don't know that he ever gets like a top 12 consideration, but possibly top 24. I thought Dylan Raiola looked the better quarterback in this matchup. His pocket manipulation was on point. Everybody talking about Shedeur and what he was doing. Raiola looked better. Now, again, I'm not going to sit here and crap all over Shedeur Sanders. That offensive line, we've said was probably not going to be much better. Didn't look it against Nebraska in this one, but just hold on to the ball too long. And one of the main things that stood out to me in that game, talking about Quinn Ewers and Dylan Raiola, there's a big play in the Michigan game. I think it was in the second quarter, and I don't remember who the wide receiver was that he threw it to, but Quinn Ewers was in the pocket, sees the blitz coming, and throws the ball into the blitz. Like, throws it into where the vacancy is in the defense with the players blitzing you for a big completion. I really wish I could remember who it was. I know it wasn't Golden. It might have been right. It might have been Helm, the tight end, because it was like over toward the left side of the field. He grabbed it and ran up the field for like 5-6 yards for a first down. Pretty sure it was Helm. Don't remember exactly at this moment. But again, throw into the blitz, which is what you're supposed to do. And guess who did that in that same game? Dylan Raiola, multiple times. You know who didn't? Shedeur Sanders. When those players blitz, number one, Shedeur didn't even seem to recognize it, didn't pick it up, but then tried to run, and he's just not the athlete. Dylan Raiola proved he's a better athlete than Shedeur Sanders, and if you want to go by the star index has been showing like a lot of these guys need to be certain things. I do think that Dylan Raiola has a chance to kind of be the outlier there because he's not quite up there with some of those guys, but I think he's looked amazing already in his first couple starts. But Dylan Raiola doesn't even, I believe, come out as a very good percentage in the star index. So if he doesn't, what do you think Shedeur comes out as? Like, I get it. It's fun to either hate or love Shedeur because of whatever. I think that he's got a lot of very good tools. I will stand firm in the camp that I believe he's a second round quarterback. Like, he's a quarterback that sure will win you games at times in the NFL. And I think overall is just a backup quarterback. Like, he's a guy who will come in. He's not going to, I don't think will lose you games, but he's not a guy that you draft in the first round, pin your franchise on and say, this is the guy that's going to take us to a Super Bowl. I just don't see it with Shedeur. Again, go back whenever he came out of Jackson State. So last year, going to Colorado, I felt like I wrote an amazing write-up on him, very glowing of the player that he was coming out of Jackson State, because I do think that there is talent there. And a lot of that, too, was being pinned into the Sean Lewis offense. And I will also say a lot of that doesn't help him, too, actually. Just to defend Shedeur for a second here, when they have 5 rushing attempts in the first half or something like that, Dion comes over and it's like, well, we need to run the ball more, blah, blah, blah. That they didn't. Like, when defenses know you're just going to drop back and throw the ball 60 times a game, you're not helping your son, your starting quarterback, as much as you think you are. Granted, Dion knows more about football. It's forgotten more about football in the last 30 seconds than I'll ever learn in my life. I'm not trying to say Dion doesn't know what he's doing, but when the defenses know that you're just going to drop back and throw the ball, like I said, 50, 60 times a game, and you don't have, to Kyle McCord's credit here, when you don't have the Syracuse offensive line, you don't have the Oregon offensive line, like, what do you expect's going to happen? Like, I get it. Yeah, people are talking about Shedeur was dicing the defense up when he got time. Okay, every quarterback does that, though. Every competent quarterback at the college, NFL level, high school level, when you have all day to throw the ball, you should be able to dice up the defense because you should see your wide receivers coming open. They talk about what most cornerbacks can cover for like 30 seconds before whatever happens. It's not like Nebraska has a bunch of elite corners on that team. So like spare me the when he got time, he was dicing everybody up. That every quarterback can do that. Like, come on. So it was not a good game for Shedeur. I stand firmly in the camp that he is. I mean, he's still top 12 ranked for me right now, but I just think he's more of a day 2 pick. I'm going to stand on that, stand by that. We'll see what happens moving forward. But again, maybe, I know Cover 3 mentioned this a lot. I think it was Tom Fernelli who talked about it on the Cover 3 podcast last week that everybody looked at that North Dakota State game and remembered North Dakota State a couple years ago with like Trey Lance and how they were rolling through the FCS, one of the best programs. If you really go look at all the players that they lost and everything, they're not quite there anymore. And then everybody was like, oh, look at him go. They did this. And then they barely won the game. I said then maybe let's hold off and see what Colorado looks like for a couple weeks instead of crowning guys after 1 week. Stock up, stock down. I mean, look, we'll start with stock up. Again, I'm going to go ahead and say it. Kyle McCord needs to be up there. Right now, he is a top 10 fantasy option. If Jeff Nixon is going to continue to throw the ball like this, I think you've got to move him up there. I get it. He's not bringing you any rushing ups. I think he had 10 yards rushing. He did take, I think, a couple sacks. I honestly don't remember, but he picked up a big third down in that game against Georgia Tech as well, using his legs. They're going to allow him to continue to throw the ball for 30, almost 40 times a game. He needs to be up there because right now he is just dissecting defenses. DJ Lagway, I mean, I don't know how much more his stock could go up. It's not like he was sitting in a bad spot. I have him ranked as a top 5 quarterback right now. But I mean, after that performance, I think we talked a lot about, you don't want to see a quarterback go out there and play poorly, and he didn't. So I think his stock has to be up at least somewhat. Quali Conley, running back, Arizona. I talked about him as the guy. I thought he was going to have a really good season. He was my flag plant at the running back position for our flag plant episode. Arizona won against NAU 22-10. Yesterday. I haven't had a chance to fully go back and watch this game, but again, a lot of people were really high on. I can't remember who the other running back was, and I think he was out in this game. I did not see him play out there, but Quali Conley went over 100 yards in this game running the ball and was one of the leading wide receivers as well with 5 catches for 38. I mean, he's a guy who last I looked was like 20%, 21, something like percent rostered on Fantrax. He needs to be rostered. He's this guy. Arizona's going to a lot. Again, it was like 200 plus receptions before going up to San Jose State last year. I think he's going to have, again, a really good year this year. And I do think he's got NFL upside. Again, I don't think he's a day 2 guy, likely a day 3 guy, and probably more of a change of pace back. So he's never going to be a guy that you rely on in the NFL. But in those C2C leagues, when you just want a guy who is going to make it to the NFL, I think Quali Conley has that ability. Thomas Castellanos just continues to look good for Boston College. I think his stock has got to be rising. An interesting one for me that I don't think a lot of people are talking about. Brendan Lewis, quarterback for Nevada. He has had 3 really good games in a row, 26 plus fantasy points all 3 weeks. And again, I get it. Like, not a guy that's probably ever going to finish as like a top 10 to 12 option. But when it comes to the quarterback position, even those guys who finish in like the 24 range are good for you. 26.3, 25.3, 35.25 this past week against Georgia Southern as a fantasy option available. Let me see. His roster percentage is 11%. So if you are looking for a guy that can put you 25 plus fantasy points up available, Brendan Lewis for Nevada might be that guy. Likely going to be the starter the rest of the season. Nevada does not have a hard schedule. I mean, I'm looking at one of my leagues where, it's definitely, I would say, a league with a lot of people who really know what they're doing. He is by far the best option available outside of Eli Holstein and then Joe, the Yukon Huskies quarterback, Fagnano. I'm not quite sure how to say it. Who he did have a big game. It's just 56 points fantasy-wise. We're about to see. So his stock's rising for me. I think a guy at least you should put on your watch list. And then Aiden Childs, just once again, get it. He threw multiple interceptions. 3 touchdowns in that one, was running the ball, drove Michigan State down the field for the field goal to win the game. People hating on this kid because he had a bad game in week 1. It's ridiculous. That's the things some people say that come out of their mouth. Stock down. Alex Orji. Yikes. He's a guy that it really sucks because I drafted him as like my 4th quarterback in a lot of those underdog best ball drafts in hopes that as long as he's just running the ball a little bit behind that Michigan offensive line, he's going to be good. Nope. Looked bad both weeks. I mean, there was one this week he should have just handed the ball off to Donovan Edwards and probably would have at least gotten close to a first down. Tried to run it right into the back of his offensive lineman. Then Texas was there, brought him down. Like, Alex Orji still look good. I think Felix tweeted out future tight end. That's what it's looking like right now. I mean, Alex Orji stock's got to be shooting way down. Same with Gavin Sawchuk. I've got to take the L on that one. Like, I try not to panic so much after just a couple weeks, but it's been 2 weeks, and this has looked really bad for Gavin Sawchuk. Like, I just think he, for whatever reason, doesn't seem like he's going to be the guy for Oklahoma. It sucks to say that because I really love the player, really love his game, but it seems to be the Javonte Barnes-Taylor Tatum show. I don't want to say droppable, but like at this point, I think your best hope is he transfers to a lower P4 or even a G5 school. And then maybe he produces free on the college side. He's got 2 years of eligibility left. Like at this point, I don't know if you even can have that high hopes for him as an NFL guy. So it really sucks to say that. As like I said, I've been a big fan of Gavin Sawchuk for a long time, but like I do think at this point he's probably droppable. Oh, I mean, Felix, I know if he was here right now, would just be doing like some kind of, trying to pretend to be humble / told you so dance here with Connor Wigman. Texas A&M last night played, McNeese, and they won 52-10. So you're thinking Connor Wigman went out there and played well. Don't get me wrong, really good completion percentage. Went 11 for 14 for 125 yards and 2 touchdowns. I think the dream is dead, folks. Dream's dead for Connor Wigman. If you were holding on like I was to the seat of your pants at this point, it's just time. Drop him. I guess if he does turn it around, he'll be available because I don't think anybody's going to go get him. But not a great performance again for Connor Wigman, who again was going up against McNeese. I didn't even realize was an actual college. So, yeah, not great for him. Kyron Drones is also on my list of stock down. Now, some of this is definitely due to the injury. We expected him to be kind of this dual threat quarterback that we thought was going to be really good for you in fantasy. He ended up having a really good day in week 1 at the end of the game against Vanderbilt, but did not look good for a very long time. And this one against Marshall, just 130 passing yards and 1 touchdown. Just did not look good. 67% completion percentage, 14-21. Did nothing on the ground. 13 yards. Did technically get you a rushing touchdown. I would stock down. I don't know that I'm dropping him because I think maybe some of the rushing is because of the leg injury. But overall, I'm really worried about Kyron Drones. I think stock down. The other 3 quarterbacks here, I'll just group together because they're guys that we thought were going to be good. Dillon Gabriel, Oregon. Jackson Arnold, Oklahoma. Avery Johnson, Kansas State. I mean, look, I get it with Dillon Gabriel. Last week, 300-plus passing yards. But this week, 200. Like, don't get me wrong, he's extremely efficient. But this just does not look like an explosive offense like it did last year with Bo Nix. We're not seeing these big explosive plays. He's not I don't even want to say he's not accruing stats. I mean, he had 200 yards passing, he had 300 yards passing, but it's not translating to fantasy points. And again, these are the games Oregon should have been winning by a large margin, and him putting up those points, and he's just not. And the fear with Oregon is they've looked, for my opinion, overmatched in the Boise State game. They were getting pushed around on both sides of the ball against Boise State. Didn't look that way against Idaho, but they still were not able to really capitalize. Oregon State next week. I mean, look, they're a better team than Oregon State. It's a rivalry game, though. Like, it's a civil war. Like, I would not be surprised if Oregon State does the same thing Boise State did, at least keeps it close. Then the UCLA, Michigan State, Ohio State, Purdue, Illinois, good defense. Michigan, good defense. I mean, Maryland's ranked as a good defense. It is what it is. Wisconsin, Washington, like, we thought Dillon Gabriel was going to be like locked in as like a top 5 option. I'm not seeing that right now. So I'm legitimately worried about him. Already mentioned my stuff on Jackson Arnold, worried about him. That is what it is. But Avery Johnson, I mean, look, as a rushing threat, yeah, Avery Johnson's really good. Impressive. Man, this cough is killing me. Impressive rusher. Yesterday against Tulane, 181 yards through the air, 2 touchdowns, only 40 yards on the ground. Not a very good game. And against UT Martin, kind of the same thing. 153 yards passing, 2 touchdowns. On the ground, he had a whopping 37 yards. Like, maybe it's just taking time for him to get into the groove of being the starter for Kansas State. But again, a lot of people fell in love with this kid because of his rushing upside and thought, this is a dual threat guy. This is the guy that we can count on bringing his rushing stats. Nope. Oh, this is a guy that we can think, we'll figure it out. But no, like, he's not looking good. Avery Johnson stock has got to be dropping fairly quickly. And then this last one. This last one, I'm not going to lie, hurts for me because it is going to be a player that I love. And when I say stock down, I say this in a matter of what I think he does this season. Still think the NFL upside is there. My goodness. But it's Travion Henderson, who so far this season has, what was it? No, I hit the wrong button. I was trying to pull his stats back up here, not the other way around. He is just behind Quinshon, 18-22. So, I mean, they've been splitting the ball fairly evenly. James Peebles actually has 16. Again, a lot of that has actually come in garbage time. And when you look at these stats from like a just like overall perspective, Travion Henderson, 18 attempts for 131 yards and 2 touchdowns. Quinshon, 22 for 163 and 3 should have been 4. 7.4 yards per average for Judkins, 7.3 for Henderson. But I'm telling you, if you watch these games, Quinshon just looks like the better runner. And I do worry that at some point in these bigger games, when they need those big first down runs and whatnot, that they're going to lean more on Judkins and almost become a thing that we saw with Travion and Mayan early in Travion's career, where Henderson looked like the more explosive runner. So they moved away from Mayan in those big games, and it was Henderson when he was healthy. I think the same thing can happen here. I honestly don't think you can start either one of them. I mean, I guess Judkins probably did well for you yesterday just because of the touchdowns. And he did have like a 70-yarder called back for a hold that I don't think was a hold, but is what it is. They called it. Stock down a little bit for Travion Henderson. Not a guy you can start this year. I do, again, though, expect him to get drafted. A couple just big things I want to touch on real quick. The running back returns. Caleb Johnson. Felix and I talked about him last week possibly having a big bounce back. He did 34 fantasy points. Dylan Sampson, Tennessee running back. Oh, Caleb Johnson, Iowa running back, by the way. Dylan Sampson, Tennessee running back. Big game for him last week. Cameron Seldon out. He got all the work. 31 points. Cam Cook looked good for TCU, 25 points. Cam Scatterbo Scattaboo. Everybody, it is Scattaboo. It's the second week in a row that the commentators have said it is Scattaboo. 32 points for Arizona State. I'm still finishing watching up that game right now against Mississippi State, but he looked good. Really quick, want to touch on some freshmen who had big days. Nick Marsh, wide receiver, Michigan State, 33.4 points. Big day. We talked a lot about Colin and I did in the Big Ten show. Seemed like him and Aiden Childs had a connection throughout fall camp. That looks like it's coming to fruition at the moment. Jeremiah Smith, 22.9 points. Bryant Wesco, 20 points. Jeremiah Smith, wide receiver, Ohio State. Bryant Wesco, wide receiver, Clemson. Ryan Williams, wide receiver, Alabama, put the nail in the coffin against USF this past Saturday. 16.8 points. Ja'Cory Barney, wide receiver for Nebraska, 13.45 points. Was used as a rusher as well at one point. Interesting name to watch. He looked more impressive to me than Jalen Lloyd. And Jalen Lloyd's a guy I know Moxley, myself, really liked. I think Felix even wrote an article on him. I wonder if he's going to be the guy who actually kind of steps up in that role. Rice, true freshman running back Taji Atkins, 21.1 points. Now, obviously, Dean Connors is there. Dean Connors had a big day. I did not see if that was because he came out, what happened exactly with that Rice game, but a name to mention. Then two quarterbacks really quick. Caden Simonza, Ball State quarterback, true freshman, 42.7 points, announced the starter. Really big day as your first game. And I just wanted to mention Elijah Brown. Only 10 points on the day. He's not a guy that you were starting, but came in garbage time here for Stanford and looked really impressive. Drove down the field, went 7 for 7, touchdown. I think it was like 85 yards. Really impressive for him in that game. So before we get out of here, again, I just want to mention these really quick. So the top scorers on the week, I'm going to try and do this every week. Top 15 at quarterback. Cade Klubniks, Clemson, 61.4 points. As I mentioned earlier, UConn quarterback Joe Fagnano, 56.2. Garrett Nussmeier, big day for LSU, 52.4. Kyle McCord, Syracuse, 44.5. Carson Beck, 43.9 for Georgia at 6. Navy quarterback Blake Horvath, 43.8 points at 7. I just mentioned Caden Somoza for Ball State, 42.7. Again, announced as a starter. I would imagine widely available on Fantrax leagues. Wonder if Jared, or as of this moment, I have not seen if Jared or Felix have dropped their waiver wire articles yet. So he is 3% rostered right now, and it's indicated that he will be the starter throughout the season. So it's going to be, wait a minute, maybe he's not a true freshman, and that's why. So it doesn't look like he is actually a true freshman. It looks like he redshirted last year. But regardless, really big game for him. 1%, 3% rostered, a guy I would probably go look to pick up. West Virginia quarterback Garrett Green, 42.6 points. DJ Lagway, freshman quarterback Florida, 42.4. Cam Ward, Miami quarterback, 40.5. Jordan McLeod, Texas State quarterback, 40.45. Matt Sluka, UNLV quarterback, 39.5. Skylar Locklear, UTEP quarterback, 38.85. Haynes King, Georgia Tech quarterback, 38 points. And Thomas Castellanos coming at the 15th spot, 36.5 points. For the running backs, Henry Parrish for Ole Miss, 43 points. 43.1. Rutgers quarterback Kyle Monungai, 40.1. Boise State running back Ashton Jeanty, 40 points. Pitt running back Desmond Reed, 37.4. Rice quarterback, I keep saying quarterback, don't I? Running back Dean Connors, 36.7. RJ Harvey, UCF running back, 36.6. Iowa running back Caleb Johnson, 34.6. Jaquindon Jackson, Arkansas running back, 33.2 points. Braden Sloan, Ball State running back, 32.9. Arizona running back Cameron Scatabo, 32.7. Dylan Sampson, Tennessee running back, 31.9. Mario Anderson, Memphis running back, 30.8. Ontario Brown, NIU running back, 30.5. Didn't talk about them upsetting Notre Dame. All those Riley Leonard better than Quinn Ewers tweets seem to be getting deleted. And I looked on Twitter the other night. Riley Leonard, not the good quarterback. Who would have thought? Felix's got DJ Giddens, Kansas State running back, 27.7 points at 14. And at 15, Tulane running back Mekhi Hughes at 27.5 points. And last but not least, the wide receivers. Magdalena leading the wide receivers this week. Fresno wide receiver with 38.3 points. UNLV wide receiver Ricky White at 34.45. Blast from the past, Donovan Green, Wake Forest wide receiver, 33.6. True freshman Nick Marsh, Michigan State wide receiver, 33.4. Ty Felton, Maryland wide receiver, 32.6. Chris Dawn, Texas State wide receiver, 32 points. Another blast from the past. This is the guy I was talking about in our first iteration of this network before I was even at Campus to Canton. Dante Wright with Temple, used to be Colorado State superstar. 31.15 points. Brennan Presley, wide receiver, Oklahoma State, 30.6. Kyron Lacey, LSU wide receiver, 29.5. Another blast from the past. Kanata Mumfield, one of my first articles at, actually, I don't even know if I think it was an article at Campus to Canton. I know Felix did a video on him. I talked about him in a pickup article. I said you should pick up Kanata Mumfield. It was Montrell Johnson and Carson Steele, actually, before any of them were like more than 10% rostered on Twitter. I'll have to go find that thread. Obviously, things have not quite worked out for him in the transfer up to Pitt, but he had a good day in week 2, 29.3 points. DT Sheffield, North Texas wide receiver, 29.3. Theo Weiss, Missouri wide receiver, 27.9 points. A lot of that came after Luther Burden went down. I've not seen if it's anything serious. They've just said that he was not coming back into the game, so something to watch for one of the best wide receivers in college. Trevor Pena, Syracuse wide receiver, 26.5. Andrew Armstrong, Arkansas wide receiver, 26.4. And then coming in at 15, Eugene Wilson, Florida Gators wide receiver, 26.1 points. Guys, thanks so much for listening, watching College Fantasy Recap Week 2. I will be back later in this week to talk more about any games that I missed that I got a chance to watch from week 2 and previewing some week 3 stuff and some recruiting stuff in the all-in-one college football show. Guys, enjoy.